Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biohackers Lab. I'm your host, Gary Kerwin, and on today's episode, I have Dr. Shawn Baker. Dr. Shawn Baker is an orthopaedic surgeon based in California who is a multi-sport world record holding athlete who has currently just entered the Masters 50 Plus world, and he's planning to break even more world records in that field. Thanks so much for coming on to the episode today, Shawn.
Gary, thank you. It's a pleasure.
So, the reason I got you on is because your Twitter feed is fascinating. I recommend anyone, I'm going to link to everything in the show notes, but people should definitely follow you because I've learned a ton just from watching what you share on Twitter. And the concept I really want to hone in today is the carnivorous diet, or what I see some people call the zero carb diet. So I think if we could start off with just explaining why are you so passionate about eating a lot of meat in your diet?
Well, it's not that I'm passionate about eating meat. I'm just passionate about doing what works well for me and going through the process and discovering what that actually is. It just so turns out that that's a diet that works really well for me. And when you look around, there are a lot of other people that have found this out as well. And so I think most people don't even make that journey. And so most people just kind of flail around and do a little change here and there. And they don't really make a real effort to sort of objectively critique what's going on. And so one of the nice things about what I'm doing is I've really eliminated a lot of dietary confounders and kind of boiled it down to its very basic, as basic as it can be, and can see what happens. And, it's a strategy I think people can use to really make informed decisions based on that. It's really hard nutrition is extremely, extremely difficult. I mean, there's so many different things that go into that. And personally, after having done this for many, many years now, with different experimentations, I've come to the realization that it should be very simple, just like it is with pretty much every other species on the planet. And just because we're smarter than the other ones doesn't mean we have to be dumber about our diets, which is, I think, is what we do.
So I'd be interested then in, so you said you've done lots of nutrition experiments on yourself, which is exactly what biohackers are, so self-experimentation, N equals 1 stuff. And what kind of eating journey have you been on to get to this point where you're at? So were you low carb? Were you ketogenic? What kind of things have you played with?
Right. So I would say about 6 years ago, when my health was not in a good, relatively poor place, I started to look at diet. I'd been an athlete my whole life, and I continued training very hard, but despite the hard training, I was seeing some negative things going on in my health. Some blood pressure was slightly elevated. I was difficulty sleeping. I was probably developing sleep apnea. I had more body fat on me than I wanted. I had some joint issues, all those things that kind of creep up on us as we age. And at that point, I was in my sort of mid 40s. And so I started playing on diet. And the first thing I did was what I would advise patients to do was just basically reduce calories and increase my exercise activity. And I did that, and I actually did that fairly successfully. But it was hard. It wasn't something that was sustainable for me. I talked to Paul Burgess about this on a different show about 6 months ago. And I was literally exercising 3 times a day, and my caloric intake was probably, 50% to 40% of what I was eating routinely. So I had a tremendous caloric deficit and a huge output in exercise. And I was able to lose weight, but it just wasn't sustainable. So then, as I kind of further started studying nutrition, I kind of sort of attached myself to the sort of paleo or primal type of diet. And that was certainly a step up as far as sustainability for me, or something that I could actually do. And then I kind of looked into the science more. Then I got sort of into low carb, and I did that for a while. Then I started doing ketogenic diets. And then this whole time I was competing as an athlete. And so I was really kind of monitoring my progress. And at that point, I was doing what I'm still doing now, is this Concept 2 rowing stuff. And the nice thing about the Concept 2 rower, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's a very, very objective method for feedback for looking at your own physiology. I mean, it's just wattage. There's not much technique to it. I mean, you have some basic technique, but once you have that down, it's just where am I at physiologically? And it's such a good tool that you can say, I'm better, I'm worse. Either I can produce the wattage or I can't. And so as I got into the ketogenic diet, I started playing with different variations, whether it was, a cyclic ketogenic diet, targeted ketogenic diet. I would carb load on the weekends. I would do some, targeted carbohydrates before workouts, a little bit after sometimes. I would do, carb backloading. There's a guy named D.H. Kiefer, I think, who's got some books on carb backloading. So I experimented with all those things, and I would try to really objectively critique my performance. And I couldn't objectively say I saw big improvement with those strategies. And so then I kind of started just staying ketogenic most of the time, or almost all the time, and my performance continued to improve, and a lot of things in my health improved as well. Then I, started to, look at some of the steak and egg diets that were kind of popular in the 1950s and 60s with some of the early bodybuilders. And as I did that more and more often, I just got to where I found that when I was doing that, I felt the best. And so then I kind of just, increased those periods of time, and then started doing some of the research on the zero carb population, studying some of those folks. And I was seeing just, people saying that their health was improving significantly, and some of the issues that I was still having were getting better and better. And so about 8 months ago, I kind of transitioned fully into this full-time carnivory. And, I just continue to see improvements in my health and performance, and so that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like you've done a lot of what are very popular diet strategies at the moment, and what a lot of people are talking about. But you were using your physical power as a parameter to gauge which one was working best for you, other than just physical weight and feeling. So you could actually see, wow, I'm kicking butt on the wattage on the Concept 2 on this one. This is my body's got loads of energy and it's performing much better.
Yeah, I would say that was the easiest way for me to get really objective feedback about what my physical capacity was. Now, there were other things that I was looking at as well. I mean, there are, as you get older, there's some skin related changes that occur with aging, and I was seeing some of those things that were starting to reverse on me. So I was kind of just keeping an eye on certain little areas of skin and seeing those things going away. I had some aches and pains that had plagued me for decades, and those things started to go away. And so, those things are a little bit subjective, but you still notice those things. And if you're in tune with what's going on, you can kind of, say objectively, kind of be somewhat objective about it. But I mean, like I said, the Concept 2, it's really, really objective, because it's just pure wattage, and it's either you can produce it or you can't. And so right now, I'm doing pretty well on that. I'm pretty happy with where it's going.
Well, again, having I follow you on Twitter, and I used to do competitive rowing at school, so I fully understand the Concept too. I spent a lot of time on an ergo to train for rowing, and when I looked at your split times, it's incredible what you're pulling for 500-meter splits, and just the times that you're doing. So anyone who doesn't understand that, it's just know that Shawn is a beast on the Concept 2. I think a lot of people in their 20s would love to achieve what you can even do at in the 50s now that you are at.
Yeah, it's for people that haven't done it, it's hard to explain. But I think anybody that's actually, certainly crew guys, at least in the modern era, certainly know a lot about the Concept 2, and they know how unforgiving and uncaring it is. It doesn't care how much you hurt. It's always the same.
That's so true. Okay, so I guess what I and maybe listeners would like to know now. So we're talking more about a carnivorous diet, and I think we need to touch on that. That's different to a zero carb diet, is it? So the word what a lot of people would think is, oh, Shawn's on a zero carb diet, but you would say you're not on a zero carb diet.
Well, I think as most people it's basically a misnomer. Most people that are on a zero carb diet are on a carnivorous diet. And so when you tell someone you're on a zero carb diet, they assume you're eating no carbohydrates. And that's not actually true, because if you eat things like eggs and certain meats and cheeses, you're going to get a little bit of carbohydrate in there. If you eat liver, you're going to have, there's a little bit of glycogen in there, so you're going to get some carbohydrate. What that really means is you avoid any plant products. And so you don't eat vegetables, you don't eat fruits, you don't eat wheats, grains, nuts, seeds, basically anything that's derived from a plant. Now, some people will have a little bit of spices. They might, put some pepper on their meat, use salt and pepper and things like that. And occasionally, that's the extent of that. But basically, it's sort of basically a carnivorous diet. And yes, zero carb is unfortunate. It's an unfortunate term because it causes a lot of confusion, because people say, well, you've eaten an egg, so that's a half a gram of carbohydrates, so you're not really zero carb. And so it would be better to term it as just a pure carnivorous diet, I think would be more accurate.
And is that the way that you eat then? So you don't eat vegetables and fruits. You just eat meat. Is that correct? Meat and eggs.
That's largely correct. And then people ask you to define meat. And so, I mean, basically it's any kind of animal, whether it's beef, lamb, chicken, turkey, fish, even, if you want to eat shrimp or mollusks, mussels, oysters, things like that. That's how I think most people define meat within this particular community. And then there's, eggs are certainly animally derived. Some people will sort of eschew eggs. Some people will do the same thing with dairy. Dairy obviously comes from an animal source as well. And so there's people that have trouble with dairy. There's people that have trouble with eggs for whatever reason. And that's basically it. I think, and as far as drinking, I drink primarily water. I mean, that's all I drink basically. I've never was in the habit of drinking. I think you just saw you had made a cup of coffee or something, but
I did.
I've never been a coffee drinker just because I never liked it. And so, but there's still a lot of those folks that still will drink some coffee. I think the general thought was that as they try to drink it in accompaniment to a meal, and so not to sort of use coffee as a meal as a thought as it might, suppress an otherwise normal appetite. And so, yes, it's a very different dietary regimen than the whole earth is on for the most part, except for a select few thousand. Now, although it's interesting as more and more people are trying it, and more and more people are finding some very positive health benefits from doing so.
Yeah, so to me, this sounds like the complete polar opposite to a vegetarian diet, if anyone wanted to imagine where it is on a spectrum, because you are looking to eat various forms of meat. And I know in your case, you do add cheese, because I've seen the pictures on your burger patties, which we'll talk about. And so you'll add in some form of dairy, and you're happy to get the protein from egg too. But that's really what you look to eat, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to say, a monthly diet, I would say 95% of it would come from red meat, and then the remaining 5% would be made up of eggs, cheese, and seafood. So that would pretty well describe it. I mean, dairy, I try to limit. Sometimes I'm better at it than other times. I think for me, dairy tends to be a net negative overall. But sometimes, you just kind of, you fall prey to because it tastes so darn good,
And this way of eating, you say, is what you've noticed has made you feel the best out of all your experiments so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's remarkable, and I think I felt really good on a ketogenic diet. And there's a lot of people that do. And so, with me, I was just trying to push to the very, very extremes of, performance. And so when I was on a ketogenic diet, we'll go back to this rowing, concept too. I pulled a 1:16.5 500 meter, row, which was a world record at that time. Or actually it was an American record for the 40 plus group, and I was 49 at the time. And then when I went on this all meat diet, my performance just, after about a month of sort of transition, my performance just continued to improve, and my training didn't really change. And so then I took another basically 2 seconds off that, which at that pace is it's a lot. faster you get, those even tenths of a seconds get hard, but I pulled another 2 seconds off that, and I'm likely good for even more. And I think, from a performance standpoint, if you compare a zero carb diet to a sort of a ketogenic diet, if you look at what the major differences are, I think certainly you do spend some time or a fair bit of time in ketosis on an all meat diet, depending on your meal frequency and your activity level. So I think if you want to argue ketosis is good, and I think a lot of people do, then I think that gives you that. But the other thing is, I think one of the shortcomings of a ketogenic diet can be too much protein restriction. I think people, and there's some big controversy about that. How much is too much? Is protein bad for us? Does it knock us out of ketosis? Does it cause rampant gluconeogenesis? Does it make us age faster? And I think those questions are still very much undecided. But from a performance standpoint, we clearly know that protein supports performance. I mean, we've known that for literally thousands of years. Athletes thousands of years ago knew that if they ate meat, they would be stronger. You can look at the historical accounts of like the Mongols and all these other various war bands that, that's what their diet was, and they were stronger warriors. And that's analogous to athletic performance. But the other thing that, there are a few things that are well accepted in the supplement world as being at least somewhat effective. One of those is creatine. And we know that's pretty good for performance. Meat has that, in a pretty good amount, especially when you're eating the amounts that I do. I'm eating, 2 kilos of meat a day, sometimes, which is a lot, people would say, well, you can get in creatine, but you'd have to eat a lot of meat. So you never do it. So that's why you have to supplement. But when all you eat is meat, you end up eating a lot of meat. So you get all this creatine in there. There's precursors for, beta alanine, which has also been shown to improve performance. And so I think it's a good performance fuel. The other thing that I noticed just personally is we talked about joint issues, joint health, joint.
And being an orthopedic surgeon, you're very aware of joints.
Very in tune with that, because I know, if I have a pain, I know pretty much exactly what it is, what's likely the cause of it, and then I can just kind of monitor those things. And even though I'm a surgeon, I'm not a fan of operating on everything. There's some things that clearly need surgery, but there's a lot that we do, and unfortunately, a lot of surgeries I've done over the years, it probably, had I known about this, and we had patients that were willing to adequately adjust their diet, they probably could have avoided surgery, and that's something, an area that's there's just not a lot of interest in, just because there's no money in it. So, it's hard to get that tested. And that's something maybe we can talk about. That's something I'm trying to help make happen. But yeah, from a performance perspective, you can argue whether a high carbohydrate diet is best for athleticism or performance. In different sports, you're all going to have different requirements, as you know. You can argue that a ketogenic diet has its advantages, metabolic flexibility has advantages, and and I will argue that a zero carb diet, at least from what I'm doing right now, which is 500 meter or maybe 1,000 meter, 100 meter, 1 minute rowing, has been the best performance I've had. I've also seen that in just basic gym strength. I think I do a lot of weight training as well, and so I've seen my numbers in the gym also going up, and it's been. I tried to calculate my wattage increase on the 500 meter, and it was about an 8% increase in wattage from world record row at 116.5 to 114.5, that's pretty significant when you're already at a world class level. Putting another 8% on there, that's not it's not insignificant.
Yeah, and especially when you're going from your 40s to your 50s. Some people would say, oh no, you'd have to be in your 20s or 30s to get performance improvements, and you're showing no, you can still do it as we grow older, which is fantastic. So because I'm thinking too, a lot of people, as soon as they go 40 plus, they put themselves in a mental state, oh, I'm only degrading, so I've just got to accept it. But I think your story is just another one of those highlights, like, don't just accept it. Actually, you can do something.
Yeah, I think it's something, it was actually surprising to me, because I got to about 45, and that's when I started seeing a kind of a decline in what I was capable of doing. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, just hang on to as much as you can. And then, if you listen to the traditional sort of advice out there, it's, as you get older, you need to you need to recover more. You just don't have that train. You don't have the recovery capacity. You don't have the ability to train intensely like you did when you were in your 20s and 30s, and you need to space those out if you do that. And I just found that not to be true in my case. I was able to, and I think diet largely had a big role in this. And I think certainly a ketogenic diet helped me with that, but even more so, this zero carb or carnivorous diet has helped my recovery, where I can just go at it day in and day out like I was in my 20s. I don't, if I look back to what I was capable of, 20 years ago, I'm still capable of largely that with regard to training intensity, training frequency, and my recovery is actually probably better. I don't get sore very much. I had this about 2 weeks ago. I hadn't done full squats in a while, and just because I've been doing other things, a lot of jumping and deadlifting and stuff like that. But I just put a bunch of full squats, and I did a really pretty punishing squat workout. And I was expecting, to be limping around, walking around like an old lady for 3 or 4 days afterwards, like often happens. And it just didn't happen. I got a little bit sore, but nothing like I would have experienced before. And so I think that, I think the diet plays a significant role in that. And I think that, there's some reasons that maybe, when you're not on a high carb diet, you're not experiencing as much oxidative stress because you're not, being quite as glycolytic. And so I think that probably tends to be easier to recover from when you're using more fat metabolism. And I think there's other people that have noted that too. I'm not alone in that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. We'll get into general population, but just from an athletic point of view still. So what I'm hearing is that when you're eating a carnivorous diet, that you're noticing it's fine for performance still, that you don't need to find other forms of carbohydrate to load yourself with glycogen, with quick burning energy, that your diet's giving you that energy. But then also, interestingly, that your post-exercise feeling is that you're feeling better. You're recovering more efficiently too.
Yeah, I think those are both true. I think certainly if you were to muscle biopsy me, you would find that I have glycogen.
Yeah, no, you definitely do. But I'm just saying you don't have you. I'm thinking a lot of athletes thinking, I've got to have some sort of some carb if I need to sort of give my muscles that energy. And you're saying your diet is giving you that.
Well, I think, I think it's conditional. I think that if your sort of day-to-day diet involves eating a lot of carbohydrates, then you will adapt those different metabolic processes to be more efficient to handle that. And so with me, because I never taken any significant carbohydrate, my body has probably gotten better at converting, whether it's fat or protein into the carbohydrate I need, probably recycling lactate. Yeah. I'm probably very efficient at that. And so my glycogen levels are probably, I'll tell you, they are sufficient enough for me to break 500-meter world rowing records. And so, whether I use a little slightly higher percentage of fat to do that, I still have some glycogen. I'm still able to tap into that, and I'm still able to hit that top speed. One of the criticisms is with low carbohydrates, you don't have that top gear. And again, this is all rowing stuff, and not a lot of people understand that. But I've broken the 100-meter world record. I've broken the 1-minute world record. I've broken the 500-meter world record repeatedly. I've done, intervals with 100-meter sprints, 25 reps at just slightly above the world record pace over and over and over again. And so clearly I've got that top level gear to where I can do that. Yeah. And I think it's what you're chronically adapted to. And so, the problem with a lot of these athletic studies that they do is they put people in a study, they enroll them, and then they switch them over to a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet. And, for the first couple of weeks, you're adapting to that stuff. You're ramping up all that metabolic machinery. And during that time, they're assessing your performance. Of course, it's going to be lower. So that's one of the criticisms with this is that, if you test people for 4 weeks and three out of those 4 weeks, they're in an adaptation phase. Sure. If you put me on a vegetarian diet for 3 weeks, even though it's high carb, I guarantee my performance would tank for those 3 weeks. It's just a new thing you've got to adapt to. Mm-hmm. It's like learning a new sport almost. You can't just take a bunch of rugby players and say, okay, now we're going to go row and expect them all to adapt within 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's a key thing people need to understand. There is that metabolic adaptation. In the ketogenic community, they would call it keto flu. So when they have that stage where they could feel terrible as their body is actually looking how it's going to burn energy more efficiently and from different sources. So, and and as you said, it doesn't matter. It's not just a ketogenic diet. You could be going vegetarian and sort of go through, I guess we could call it like a vegetarian flu, when you're getting the same sort of effects when you're trying to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, it's just picking a different fuel source, and
Yeah.
it doesn't happen overnight. You've got to give it some time. And I think, one of the traditional, when they look at ketogenic diet and they talk about being fat adapted, they look at something called a respiratory quotient, and that generally seems to sort of shift at about 3 weeks. But my sort of assumption and what I've experienced is that there's other things besides respiratory quotient that come into this, and there's a lot of other things that are going on, and it's probably stuff that we can look at that I think take longer than that. I think it takes I've been sort of fat adapted for now 3 or 4 years, and so I think I continue to improve from a health standpoint, from a joint issue standpoint, and so all those things add up to athletic performance, in the long term. And so I think it's more that 3 week type of thing, even on top of that.
So, since we're talking adaptation, how would someone adapt, say, from a low carb diet to a carnivorous diet? So, I guess in this case, you could use examples of what's your eating pattern, like what's your day? Do you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or what is it that you actually eat in a day too? So, just to help with someone think, how would I adapt from that type of way of eating into your way of eating?
Right. So one of the things with, certainly a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet is, there's a very conscious attempt to manipulate your macros and hit certain fat percentages and protein percentages and stuff like that. And there's a lot of people that also couple intermittent fasting where they're going to eat in a 6-hour, 4-hour, 8-hour window. And so this type of eating or eating like a carnivore, it doesn't really involve those things. Basically, and this is sort of more philosophical, but I basically just eat whenever I'm hungry. I'll eat, and I'll eat as much as it takes to fill me up. And I kind of get an idea over time what that takes. And so generally I'll eat about 2 meals a day. So generally I'll eat something either breakfast or lunchtime. One of those 2 meals I'll eat. And then the next meal I'll eat, sometime, in the early evening typically. And so typically for me, I'll have, and it depends on my work schedule, my training schedule, how I'll fit those in typically. But, I'll have typically about 2 pounds of meat in it for a morning meal, and the same for an evening meal. Sometimes if I'm, for whatever reason I'm hungry in the middle of the day, I won't hesitate to eat a third meal in there. But again, I think it goes back to simplicity. If we look at how sort of every other animal out there eats, especially if we compare it to carnivores, they just go out when they're hungry, they run around, they go kill something, they eat it, and then they lay around for, a day or 2 or 3 days until they get hungry again, and then they go out and do it again. And I think that's generally how most animals do it. And I would argue that we are too, and that our appetite should work that way. So when we're hungry, it should mean we're supposed to eat. We've got this really messed up appetite regulation through all the food that we've been eating, in the last, you can say last 10,000 years perhaps, but certainly recently, people they're constantly snacking. We've got a whole industry that supports that. You got to eat every 2 hours, your blood sugar is going to get low. We have my kids at school, they have to have 2 snacks a day, or they can't get through the day and pay attention in class. All this stuff is really absurd, actually. We've just sort of adopted that sort of eating strategy. And so I think that, if you eat a big full meal, that fills you up, likely you'll go 6, 8, 10 hours again without eating. And that kind of ties into autophagy. Do you get some of that? Do you get some of does it produce ketones when you go longer between meals? I think your diet should generally support that, but yeah, that's basically how I do it.
Okay, so if someone wanted to start that way of eating, a simple way would just to think, go and get some minute steaks, or maybe some more substantial kinds of red meat if you want, and cook that in the morning and have that for breakfast. And when you're hungry again, just look for some more form of meat and just eat that protein versus trying to add in a salad with your steak, because you don't even need to bother with the salad.
Well, I mean, and that's controversial. And in my experience and what I can observe and lots of other people, I've seen zero detriment from excluding, fruits and vegetables and grains and stuff from my diet. One of the, again, if you go back from transition to a low carb diet, one of the big mistakes people will do is they tend to under eat. They'll come into it and they'll think, wow, a half a pound of meat it's a lot of meat to eat. And I can't really do that. And so, I will tell you there are very, very petite women, women that are 55 kilos that are eating 3 pounds, 4 pounds of meat every day. I mean, and you're just shocked to see that, but that's what they're able to do, and they maintain their size, which is kind of impressive. One of the other things that's a big misconception with this is a lot of people come into this as it's a weight loss diet, or my goal is to lose weight. And I don't think it's necessarily I don't think it's necessarily set up for that. There's people who do that and they gain weight. I mean, and certainly, you can argue that most people based on a modern diet are sort of undernourished, regardless of their body weight or how overweight or fat or thin they are. That they've sort of undernourished themselves, and they're missing a lot of protein from their actual bone structure, their muscle, their organs. Those things are all, if you examine old people and you do autopsies on elderly people, almost all their organs have shrunk. Their brains have shrunk, their kidneys have shrunk, their liver's shrunk, their heart's shrunk, their muscles have shrunk, their bones have lost protein. So all this stuff is, we've got this absence of structural protein in the body. And so if you start eating a deficient diet for 20, 30 years, it may take several years to sort of reverse that. If you look at a growing kid, he doesn't turn from a little baby to an adult size, in a matter of weeks. They've got to eat for 20 years to do that, to build all that structure. And so if you spend 25 years eating a junky diet and you start losing a lot of that structure, it might take you several years to build that back on. And so one of the things is, you eat a lot of meat, you're restoring some of that structural tissue that you may have lost. And so in the process of that, your body may be saying, hey, I need more. You're finally giving me what I need to eat. And I need more. So some people actually put on weight doing that. Most people, if you look at the social media sites that have, tens and tens of thousands of members in these, most of them will say they've lost weight. But there is a significant minority of them, and it seems to be more women, that will say, yeah, I've gained weight and I'm putting on weight. And some of it's even fatty tissue. And so it's kind of this, well, how do you resolve that? And so I think one of the people that have done it a long time will say that, yeah, you're putting on this extra weight, this extra tissue, and you're sort of rebuilding your structure. And with time, given it enough time, that sort of resolves itself. And that often is the case. For me, I haven't, I eat 4,000, 5,000 calories a day, and my weight stays right where it is. I haven't gained, a pound either way. I mean, up or down. I'm pretty stable at about 110 kilos. That's just where I stay. What I have noticed is my strength has gone up. And so, as you know from rowing, strength to weight ratios is very important. And so if I've got an Instagram account and I've got a lot of rowers that are following me now. Rowers are all watching this. And so, for crew, you want to be able to pull a low split, but if you get too big, then you slow the boat down. And so I've never been in a boat and I'd probably tip it over. So I don't much, but I do know that strength to weight ratio is a very important thing for that particular sport and a lot of other sports too. There's a lot of sports where, being able to move quickly, is good if you're strong and you don't weigh as much. And so it's probably not the ideal bodybuilding diet. I think there's probably better bodybuilding diets, but as far as performance and strength, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen just a glimpse of your muscle tone when you lifted your arm up now, but I mean, yeah, you're a big muscly guy.
Yeah, I'm certainly, I'm certainly not small. And certainly, a lot of my athletic performance is certainly because I'm a big guy. I mean, I'm not going to say that just because I ate meat, I became a world champion. I mean, I put in the time, I've done the training, I've been doing it my whole life. I know what I'm doing, but despite that, I still think the diet has made a significant impact on that.
Because there's also the concept, well, it's the truth of the word sarcopenia. So as we age, that we can lose our lean muscle mass. And is that also something that you think the carnivorous diet helps to slow down?
My suspicion is it certainly does. I mean, again, this is all anecdotal stuff and stuff that I'm hoping to put to the test through another venture that myself and another guy are sort of developing right now. But certainly there's people that will say, I went on this carnivorous diet without it really exercising. I've noticed more muscle tone. Certainly if you look at the way the elderly population eats, if you look at their diet, and there's a guy Ted Naiman, you may or may not know him.
Yes, Ted, yeah. He's another great one to follow on Twitter.
He puts up an infographic. It shows you what the average older person eats, and it's abysmally low in protein. And a lot of them, they've lost their teeth and they can't chew a lot of meat. So they're taking these soy-based protein supplements that are corn oil and, a little bit of, soy protein put in there. And they're just sarcopenic as can be. I mean, they're frail. I mean, I cannot tell you how many broken hips I've treated on little old ladies that just have no muscle mass at all. I mean, it's an easy surgery because there's nothing, when you're making an incision, there's nothing to cut through, they're so thin, but they're emaciated. And I think a lot of it has to do with diet. Now, as they get older, they have problem absorbing absorbing different nutrients. So those things all sort of tie together. But I think the first thing is you've got to address what you're actually eating. And then, if you're getting enough, the nutrients, and you have to be able to overcome any absorption issues you have. And I think all those things, like we talked about, sarcopenia is more than just muscle. It's the loss of muscle, but it's just, sarcopenia is a loss of muscle. But again, those other things occur: loss of brain size, loss of kidney size, loss of heart muscle, intestine, the absorptive surfaces of the intestine sloughs off. And so you've got all this stuff that you're just losing. And I think that, diet plays a role in that.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you would suggest that, as people age, they definitely should be eating more protein, and that's what the carnivorous way of eating is doing. You've touched a little bit on kids. Do you, with your own family, do you have your children eat more protein, more meat, or how does it work for parents who think of who might eat this way in their kids?
Yeah. So with my kids, and I'm divorced, so I have them part-time. So it's tough to, control everything they eat, and they go to school. And so, you go to school and they've got all these little parties and stuff like that. But I teach them, they know how to read labels. They know that food impacts their health. I've tried to dissuade them from eating too much sugar and giving them better options for that. And I teach them that meat is a good thing. I've created this little story time superhero named Steak Man, and so he comes in and says, but they know and they like it. I mean, when I cook up a steak, especially my little 7-year-old daughter, she's like standing behind me, pointing out which piece she wants, because she knows that's the best tasting piece of meat. And so I tend to sort of favor that in their diet. I say, hey, let's eat some hamburger, some steak, or some sausage, or some chicken, or some fish, and get that in you first. Okay, get a decent amount of that in you, and then if you're still hungry, we'll give you a little fruit, we'll give you a little cheese. I might make you a little, like a ketogenic dessert. Try to cut the sugar out of that. And that's basically what I do with their diet, and they're happy and they're healthy as can be, and they're just really good kids. They're lean, they're muscular. My little 9-year-old daughter she's just an amazing little athlete right now. But so I think that that's with the kids. I don't say you can only. Although my 9-year-old, she keeps asking me, can she do an all meat diet? I said no. Let's wait till you're a little old for now. But just
proteins, I would fully agree. I mean, even in my own family, we've noticed. I've got a 6-year-old daughter, and the more we can get her to eat protein first, the better. She feels. Yeah, we can see her energy levels, and her mood is so much better. So if she eats quick, if she eats fast-eating carbs or something, then it can be a nightmare afterwards. So.
Well, and then 45 minutes later, they're hungry again anyway, and so you're constantly having to feed them. And so like I said, I just load these kids up with protein and fat as much as I can shove in them, and then I don't have to deal with, making snacks every 45 minutes.
Yeah,
So
they're
that's
more satiated, much better.
Yeah, it's the same thing for me. If I load up on 2 pounds of steak, I don't have to even think about eating for another 10 to 12 hours. And so just from a time management standpoint,
Yeah.
it's pretty, same thing with the kids. You shove all that good food in them, and you just tell them eat, 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 eat. And then they're like stuffed and they don't want to eat again for 3 or 4 or 5 hours. And that's nice.
Yeah, no, we did that with sushi the other day with my daughter. It's the best I've ever seen her, where she's just like, no, I'm actually full. It was so nice to see too. So yeah, always trying to figure out how to get more protein into it. So talking about protein and loads, I guess some people would think, but surely if you eat that much protein that it's going to be harmful on your body, because I know it's not true, but in the public, newspapers are promoted in the past. Oh, if you eat lots of red meat, you're more prone to bowel cancer, or if you eat lots of protein, it's not good for your kidneys. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So certainly, they've actually, I think they've done a few studies on the kidney stuff, and they've not shown that to be true. There's some, clinically, I know Dr. Jason Fung, who's a nephrologist. He's done, a lot of people on these different diets, and he's not seen any issues with certainly ketogenic diets. But, protein, it's never been demonstrated to harm kidneys. If you have failing kidneys already, maybe, but I don't think that's ever really even been proven either. And there's a lot of people that actually have been known to reverse chronic kidney disease eating, a diet that's lower in carbohydrates, higher in protein. So I don't think that's necessarily true. The other thing you said about the bowel cancer, so that's interesting because the World Health Organization, I think last year, came out and classified processed meats and red meats as, I think the first was a type 1 carcinogen, or class 1 carcinogen. There's a class 2. And there's a doctor named Georgia Eads, who's actually a psychiatrist, and she wrote a very nice critique of that. I think she has a website called Diagnosis Diet, and you can look at her criticism of that. It's very nice because they took 800 studies that address that, and all they found, I think, and I may be misquoting what she kind of tabulated, but I think only about 19 of those studies actually even showed any harm. So of those 800, 781 of them were normal, and only 19 showed some harm. And most of those were rat studies. And they actually just showed that if you gave a rat too much red meat, and what else they give in rat chow is this corn syrupy, diet that they normally eat, and they genetically breed these ones to be susceptible to cancer. And then they showed that they had a marker that maybe, we're not sure, but may be associated with cancer. And we don't know if good or bad. Maybe the body produces that as a protective mechanism, but we don't know the answer to that. And so they concluded that because the rats showed that is, one of the reasons, we can call that a carcinogen. And so that's really, the evidence for that is really, really weak. And then even so, once they have that weak evidence compiled, they say that the relative risk is 18%. And so what they don't talk about is absolute risk. And so, if you look at the background population, they may have a 5% risk of developing bowel cancer. Now, if you eat a bunch of processed meat, it may go up to 6%. So you go from 5% to 6%, which is really meaningless. When you look at how the data was derived, but because 6% is 18% more than 5%, they're going to say it's an 18% increase in risk of cancer. So that's, those statistics are very misleading, and it's scary. It's, Dr. Tim Noakes likes to say scaremongering, and I think what it's about, and if you look at, there's traditional populations. We can go back historically and look at the Maasai or the Inuit, or, any of the other polar populations that have had these really, really high meat intakes, and they didn't have any high incidence of bowel cancer. People argue that, the data on that is not that good. But it wasn't that long ago. It was 1950s and 1960s where they were still looking at that stuff, where they were still eating those traditional diets. So I don't take a lot of, I don't give a lot of credence to those statements.
Okay. And would you say there's any side effects you noticed when you went all meat?
Well, I mean, I think from a transition standpoint, yeah, I mean, there were some, just like going to any other diet. For me, I noticed a little bit of a headache for about a week, and I think that was a fluid electrolyte issue, similarly to like going on a ketogenic diet. And I basically took a little more salt, took a little more water, and that seemed to rectify that. A lot of people will say, you just need to eat a little more, eat a little more meat, and that'll help you out. Certainly one of the big things is people are worried about, there's zero. I mean, there's zero fiber in this diet. So they're like, well, you can't have a bowel movement, And I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I have bowel movement every day.
Healthy bowel movements.
Right. I mean, it's just, but what happens is because, meat is just so well absorbed. I mean, but it doesn't even, there's nothing that really makes it into your colon. I mean, there's a very, very small amount compared to plant, cellulose, which you fill your colon up with that stuff because you can't digest it. Meat is all absorbed it's broken down in the stomach by the hydrochloric acid and then the different enzymes, along the small intestine. So it's highly absorbed. And so you're just not making very much. You're absorbing everything. It's going to the body and being used. Whereas when you're on a fairly high plant-based diet, there's just so much that you can't even absorb that you're making these, big bowel movements. And so there's a contrast where you say some people will have a bowel movement every 3 or 4 days and they'll be fine and it doesn't hurt them. They don't have any pain. It's just because their output is so low. And they misconstrue that, say, oh no, you're constipated because you didn't have a bowel movement 3 times a day. And that there's just it's just sort of a
misnomer.
It's a misnomer. It's not really constipation. Constipation was when you're really straining and it's painful and you can't completely get rid of what you have inside of you. And that's not what happens on a zero carb diet for the vast majority of people.
Okay.
I'm trying to think low energy, again, transitioning to a new fuel source. If you're coming from a standard diet, your energy levels might be down. You might be tired. You might be a little, lethargic. Your appetite might be low. A lot of people will notice a pretty profound appetite suppression, whether it be on a all meat diet or a ketogenic diet.
I'm also interested because, when you were talking about benefits earlier, you mentioned joints, but so would you say that your joints feel better?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they clearly felt better to me on a ketogenic diet when I dropped, and I think there are, I don't think it's a carbohydrate ratio. I just think there's certain foods, whether it be glutens or, lectins or, oxalates or salicylates or any of these things that are typically found in different plant products. Or it could be, the sugar, the fructose, or just if you're eating plain sucrose, which is obviously derived from plants. Those things I think have a negative impact on joints. To what degree and to how much and to which people, I don't know. But certainly when you eliminate all of that stuff, which is what you do on a zero carb diet or a carnivorous diet, I mean, I think your joints feel as good as they can. At least that's been my experience. And I've got, just kind of lurking on social media, I just see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that say, oh, my arthritis went away, all this pain went away, and it goes away oftentimes without weight loss, which I think is pretty telling. There's an inflammatory component to this, and and if it goes away before you lose weight, then that's pretty strong evidence to support that. A lot of people say, well, the only reason your joint pain went away is because you lost 20 pounds. Well, there's people that it goes away that don't lose any weight yet or even gain weight, and they say their joints feel better. So I think it's something in the diet, whether it's the omega-6 oils, whether it's sugar, whether it's some sort of plant chemical that affects the joints. I don't know which ones or for how severe they are, who they affect the most. But for me, looking just at my own personal experience, getting rid of all that other stuff has allowed me to have the most healthy feeling and performing joints that I've had in decades.
And you mentioned having chats with patients of your own. Have you had any case studies where you've mentioned, or patients know what you eat and they've tried it themselves and they've seen a turnaround?
Yeah, I've had quite a few. This was a few years back when I was still doing the ketogenic stuff. That you know we know that say joint replacement patients, they tend to fare a little bit worse if they're too heavy, and so we try to get them to lose weight. And there's no real good methods to do that. You can send them to a bariatric surgeon where they'll remove part of their digestive tract, whatever they want to bypass it or cut out part of the stomach or band it, or you can send them to a dietitian who typically will put them on basically a USDA or ADA or the British Dietetic Association diet, which is the the whole grains, fruits and vegetable type of thing, and they typically won't lose weight. And so I just when I discovered it myself, I just started putting people on these low carb diets or ketogenic diets, and absolutely, yeah, I mean I had pretty good success with that. And I had even a couple patients that they felt so good with their joints, we just canceled surgery, which was I was happy for that. The hospital wasn't particularly happy because their revenue comes from us doing procedures.
Theater time, yeah.
So that they don't have a very big margin on their profit margin is pretty low, and so they depend on a busy operating room. And so once I started sort of doing that, they weren't happy about that. And I had some discussions. I actually ended up leaving my employer partly due to those reasons. There's some personal things also, but one of the things was they didn't like me practicing lifestyle medicine. They wanted me just to turn the operating room over and over and over and sort of generate that revenue. And so it's one of the problems with the way medicine is done right now. We're set up. The whole thing is set up to work based on how many procedures you can do. This is how hospitals survive. They don't survive unless there's a lot of procedures being done by the cardiologists, by the surgeons, especially orthopedic surgeons. We're big volume operators. And so we support a lot of hospitals. And so once you start kind of going away from that, the hospital system has to, they can't afford their psychiatric unit. They can't afford, some of the other pediatrics. They can't afford some of the specialties that don't tend to make the money. And so we've got this system where, that's what it's about. And so if you want to get healthy and do some lifestyle stuff, you just can't do it there. And so one of the reasons I'm kind of transitioning away from that is because I really want to see if I can make a bigger impact broadly to the population with more lifestyle related stuff and less
interventions.
Interventions, correct.
Yeah. No, I think if people understood how the economics of a hospital have to work, I remember I'm from South Africa, and there was a private hospital near me, and I learned from the orthopedic surgeons there that theaters are booked per minute. So there's a rate per minute that they can charge out to the health insurance companies. So yeah, exactly. They need to, they want to rather fill out their billable minutes per day versus having empty theaters. So
yeah, I mean it's kind of interesting because and I was very good at this, but I mean, if your OR day has a hole in it and it happens too often, they'll just take it away from you because you're not filling up every single second in the operating room of the patients. There's a big push to, be efficient and get people in, get them out, do the next case, do the next case, do the next case, and keep that hospital running. And so it's it's kind of a secret. I mean, but it's certainly the way things are.
Yes, the economics. It's billable time, and they got to fill it up with as much as possible. Have you had any patients who have been willing to, because they have to have a procedure, I'm just thinking, and they go on a carnivorous way of eating for 4 weeks before a procedure, and sort of any changes? I don't know if you've had any case studies who've been willing to do that.
Yeah, no, I haven't. So right now, the way I'm practicing is something called locums tenens. So I'm just basically kind of a traveling guy.
Okay.
And so I'm not do research that way. So a lot of the stuff that just works out better for my family situation right now, so I can spend time with my kids. And it's also just because I kind of got tired of that other sort of rat race program. So I haven't really done that. I've had some people that have talked to me that have had injuries that they're rehabbing from surgery, and I've asked them to do that, and they've seemed to notice reduced healing times, better healing, less inflammation during the healing process. And so those things are, again, they're still anecdotal. I haven't written up anything we've got this sort of website going now. Well, we're starting it, n=many.com. We're trying to bring this anecdotal stuff and trying to sort of consolidate some of that and standardize some of that and seeing how diet really impacts these things. One of the things we're doing now is we're just trying to get this carnivore study. And I'm getting a lot of people signed up for this, and we're going to do a 90-day, pure meat and water diet. And then we're gonna assess a whole bunch of things during that time period. We're gonna have them check, bowel frequency and log their food and conduct all these surveys during the study. And then we likely, depending on how much funding we have, we'll do some labs at the end of that. But once we've kind of established that you can do that and that people can go 90 days on a meat and water diet and not die, which they can, but there's a lot of people out there that don't even think it. So once we've kind of established it, then we can start talking about doing interventions. And so one of the things you could look at is say, anecdotally, I saw people that would have peripheral neuropathy like carpal tunnel syndrome, and it would get better or go away by going on a ketogenic diet. And so you could get, through social media, you could find a couple hundred people with carpal tunnel syndrome. You'd have to confirm that's the actual diagnosis, and then put them all on a ketogenic diet or a carnivorous diet or a low carb diet, or whatever you wanted to do, and just see what happens. Because we're not going to get a drug company that's going to fund that study. We're not going to get a surgical group on that study because they want to do carpal tunnel releases, and so, because that's what pays the bills. But if you do that through social media, and this is n=many.com is a place where I'm hoping we can kind of start doing those things. And so once we get 400, 500, 1,000 people that all say, hey, and 90% of them say, hey, my carpal tunnel went away when I went on a ketogenic diet, then you've got some pretty compelling and some pretty powerful data that tends not to be biased by industry, by drug manufacturers, by food manufacturers, for equipment manufacturers. And so we've just got people trying to figure it out using stuff that doesn't make a profit for anybody.
Yeah, I love that. It's citizen scientist, where you just share data and you get a better picture. Because in research studies, I shared one on Twitter recently where there was I think it was an anesthetist in the Journal of Anesthetics that showed 5,000 RCTs. They frauded the data. I mean, that's incredible to think. We rely on these references, and guys are fudging the stats just so that it helps them. It is sad that that's where things go. But I love the ability that, like exactly what you're doing, where we can just share data and suddenly that's how people can learn and change their lives too. They don't have to wait 20, 30 years for a study to finally be released before they can take any action. They could even start taking action today, which is what this show is all about too, is to be able to get ahead of the curve and start learning how you can start helping your health.
Right. And I think one of the Tim Noakes talks about the wisdom of the crowds. And I think that's the true beauty in this is you can, if it's done right and the exposure is right, you can get big numbers. You can get tens of thousands of people to participate in some of these things that are not that hard to do, and they don't require any drug manufacturers or any kind of difficult things. You can get the research tools in their hands. Some of them are very easy to employ, and just put that out there, and then just keep the data open. A lot of these research studies, they hide all their data. They give you their interpretations, but they won't let you see the raw data. And I think having that raw data out there, and then people can see what actually happened, and make their own conclusions, because you can statistically analyze and group people by quartiles depending on how you like the results to turn out. I mean, there's so many ways to manipulate that stuff, and that's what we often see. And most people just see the abstract, and I mean, it's just really hard to make a good conclusion on that stuff.
Yeah. There's a science in just being able to interpret research papers. I mean, I can think of someone like Zoe Harcum. I don't know if you know about her, but yeah, she's very good at dissecting the words and the relationships and things in a paper. So you, exactly as you said, you read the abstract and think, oh no, that must be the result. And if you actually look at the data and go, no, that's not particularly true that they said in that abstract. So the content of the abstract is not, you should in essence be able to analyze the research, the content that's been shared. So, but yeah, citizens, it takes PhDs to do that stuff sometimes. So.
No, it does. I mean, I read literature, and then if I'm not very familiar with the topic at hand. I mean, it's tough to, to have the background to know what everything that goes into that. And so, but I think there are some really easy ways to do it. One of the things I like about this carnivorous diet is because we've got so much dietary confounders in nutritional research. You can look at all these epidemiologic studies where they'll say, meat eaters have a higher rate of whatever disease, or they have a shorter lifespan. And then they define what a meat eater is. And it's not what I do. It's someone who goes to McDonald's and eats the French fries and the shakes and the Cokes. And those aren't separated out from someone like me. And so, I think by doing a pure carnivorous study, you can sort of get away from that stuff. And that's why one of the sort of the beauties of that is just like, okay, what happens when you only eat meat? Do you get diabetes? Which the vegan doctors will tell you, yeah, it causes diabetes, obviously. Well, I'm like, well, I don't have diabetes, and I've been eating more meat than anybody, for a year now. And, if anything, I'm as healthy as can be. And so, those type of statements, I think, are easily disprovable by stuff like this.
And I'm going to share a picture in the episode page. This, because when you tweeted out an image of when you went to a fast food joint and you ordered, I can't remember how many burger patties. It sort of shows that you can eat this diet on the go. You just ordered the meat, the burgers, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've done that. Yeah, part of it was kind of research. I want to find out what's available to people and how much it costs, because I certainly, if this is an option for people, and I think it is, it has to be affordable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't, there's a lot of people that sort of debate this subject, and for good reason. I mean, they talk about, you should only eat grass-fed organic burgers or steaks sourced from the most reputable local sources. And I mean, that's just not doable for most people. It's just, at least in the U.S. I mean, in the U.K., I think your meat is all grass fed, if my understanding is correct. But in the U.S., it's not. And so you have to figure out, one, what is the difference in nutrition? Is it significantly more harmful not to eat the sort of the standard stuff? And then what does it cost? And, having looked at this stuff pretty extensively, I think grass-fed beef is clearly superior nutritionally, but the difference is not huge. It's relatively small when you compare that to the rest of the standard diet. So if you had to say, I can only afford eating the cheap mince or ground beef, as we call it here, that is better than going and eating all the processed, the packaged food on the shelves. It's still a huge improvement. Now, if you can afford the top end stuff, then sure, that might be a little bit more nutritious, but I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, and it probably doesn't justify the almost doubling in the price. At least here in the U.S., it's almost twice as expensive for a lot of people, and that's just not doable. So I mean, I go into the restaurants and I'll order 10 patties, 12 patties, 20 patties, depending on the size, and they definitely look at me like, I heard that before. But again, that just goes to show you what people order when they go to these restaurants. It's, give me two of the hamburgers, a side of fries, and a side of Cokes. That's their standard order. When I do that, I usually get 2 or 3 people at the counter trying to figure out what button do I hit, calculating it. But they never do that. But that just goes to show my point that a meat eater is not someone who eats meat. A meat eater is someone who eats meat plus all this other junk. And that's where epidemiology comes from. And that's where the problem with that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring up that point where you were saying how they're adding in all the other stuff in these studies, whereas you could still eat at a fast food joint if you're on the go, but more efficiently. So we're coming up for time here, Shawn. Hopefully, I think we've touched a lot of the points to educate people about a carnivorous way of eating and that it's an option. Are there any other points that you feel we haven't touched on that you would definitely like people to know, or have we gone through most of the points, do you think?
Well, I think, I mean, again, a lot of people will give me a hard time about, because I'm just not eating these vegetables, these green vegetables, and they're absolutely essential. You have to have these essential phytonutrients, and I just don't think the evidence there that supports that. A lot of this phytonutrient stuff comes from the fact that You may have we'll say we have some tribe in South America that looks, by all accounts, looks pretty healthy. And they notice that they eat some particular berry, right? This is all hypothetical. They'll find this berry, we'll call it magic berry X. And so they'll analyze magic berry X and they'll find out what chemicals are in it. And they may find that there's 100 chemicals, but it's pretty high in one particular chemical. And so they'll take that chemical and they'll test it in some cell cultures or maybe in an animal, and they'll notice a positive effect. And there are so many biochemical processes going on in the body. There's in every cell, every second, there's literally thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of these little chemical processes going on. And so they may find one that's affected in a positive fashion and say, aha, that's why these people are healthy, because chemical X from berry Y causes this one particular biochemical process to work well. So therefore, those berries are healthy, and therefore you should eat some more, and therefore we're going to make a plant extract from that, and we'll call it a phytonutrient, and humans need to eat it to live long. So what they don't say is, well, what else was in their diet? What's not in their diet? What else is in that berry that other chemicals that may be good or bad? What else does that particular chemical do to all these other chemical processes that you didn't check? And so we've got this whole sort of faith, sort of a house of cards faith built on these little tiny bits of information. And so, this whole thing about I have to have phytonutrients based on this type of data is, to me, it's hard to accept, especially when I can go for almost a year now without any of them and be in the best health of my life. And so I think you just have to make those big sort of questions and say, okay, if that's true, this shouldn't happen. What I'm doing shouldn't happen. I shouldn't be breaking world records. I should be getting sicker and sicker, and I should be having these nutrient deficiencies by now. I should have had scurvy. My teeth should have all fallen out. It's just, what you see doesn't match what you think you know. And that means either, I'm a mirage and I don't exist, or you have to recognize that I exist and thousands of others that are like me and say, okay, maybe we don't know it all, and maybe we need to rethink the way we answer these questions. And so I think that's kind of the big point I try to get across, because people are saying, well, science says this, and this, and you shouldn't be healthy, and you're going to get a disease, and you're going to die of cancer, or you're going to have a heart attack in 5 years. And I'm saying that doesn't appear to be happening. And there's people who have been doing this for 20 years or more, and that also doesn't appear to be happening. And so we have to say, why is that? So let's re-examine what we know, and let's do science a little differently. And that's, like I said, that's what I hope we can kind of get away from this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely know for sure it's my supper time, and I purposely went and bought a lot of meat so that I'm going to fill up tonight. So I think that an actionable takeaway, any listeners to the episode today, would be, don't be afraid to eat more meat. Go experiment, go try eat more meat and just see how it makes you feel. You'll probably feel more satiated, less hungry, and who knows what else could be changing to your health when you start following that spectrum. So, Shawn, what's the best way for anyone to keep up to date with your thinking, follow your thoughts? Any resources that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so certainly, the Twitter feed, I'm fairly active on that. It's S Baker MD. I've got an Instagram account where I can put a little bit more information. A lot of it has to do with athletic stuff, and that's Shawn Baker 1967. And then we're also starting this website called n=many.com. That's still under construction. So if you go to there, you're just going to get we're still building the page thing. But there's an email that's attached to that. It's called n=many@gmail.com. And I'm getting people that are, signing up for this Carnivore study. But one of the other things we're hoping to start looking at is people that have ideas like I talked about. Hey, maybe carpal tunnel syndrome can be treated with a ketogenic diet, and start feeding those ideas. And then what we can do is start opening them up to the crowds and seeing if we can get people that want to, develop protocols and recruit people to do it, and then let's see if we can get some funding for it, and can crowdsource some funding and get these studies going, and then we can start answering these questions. I like to call that, knowledge for the people by the people, so we can kind of hopefully remove all this bias and conflict of interest from this stuff, and it's for me and you and all the people out there, and let's do our own stuff and figure it out ourselves, because there's people that really don't have our best interests in mind, quite honestly, unfortunately.
Well, again, for anyone listening or watching this video on YouTube, when you go to the episode page, which I'm going to link to, it's got all the links in there for you. So, Shawn, again, thank you so much for all the knowledge bombs you dropped today. Very enlightening. Educated myself more about your way of eating, and I'm sure anyone else listening to this.
Perfect, Gary. All right, thanks. Enjoy your big steak dinner.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.